Okay, I'm about to show you one of the most absurd videos I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. This Democrat just called Joe Biden the most progressive president in history. If you don't believe me, take a look at this.
The Progressive Caucus is enormously grateful to President Biden, who's emerged as the most progressive president in the history of the United States. He's a man on a mission. He's intent on passing not one but two of the largest infrastructure investments in American history. And the purpose of the meeting was to impress upon members of Congress a sense of urgency around landing these planes as swiftly and as smoothly as we can.
Wow. Okay, so this guy is a Democrat out of the state of New York, and what he's doing there is he's just lying straight to it through his teeth. That's blatantly lying. He's lying to the American people right there. I I mean, one has to wonder, how do they come up with this nonsense? He just said that Joe Biden, the author of the crime bill, the person that made it to where you can't declare bankruptcy on your student loans, I mean, he just referred to him as the most progressive president in history. He emerged as the most progressive president. Okay, well, I actually took the liberty of comparing him to the actual most progressive president in history. His name is Franklin Roosevelt. Let's go over a little bit of what Franklin Roosevelt did, aka FDR, and let's compare it to what Biden has done so far. This won't be long. So, as president under Franklin Roosevelt, he established a federal jobs program that employed 15 million people. We got Social Security. That had never been done before. We had the first ever minimum wage. Had never been done before. We got the first ever unemployment insurance. So if you lose your job through no fault of your own, the government will come in and help you out. Had never been done before. He passed the Revenue Act of 1934, which raised income taxes on the wealthy and reduced them for lower income groups. He also raised the estate taxes on the wealthy and closed corporate tax loopholes. Why do I bring this up? Because we currently have ongoing infrastructure negotiations in this country where they're fighting and clawing about whether or not to raise the corporate tax, to lower it, to do whatever with it. And during the FDR administration, there was never no question about whether to raise it or to lower it. The question was how much. How much should we raise it? That was the question when FDR was in power. I'll go on. The Revenue Act of 1935, which raised the top tax rate from 59% to 75% on incomes over $500,000. In 1944, at the end of the war, the top tax rate was 94% on income over $200,000. $250,000 back then in 1944, which is $3.2 million today. Earners that made that much money paid 69% of their total incomes in federal taxes after exploiting every tax loophole. Now, that was only some of the stuff he did. Now, let's get into what Biden has done so far. Now, Biden has done good things so far. He raised the federal minimum wage, not the federal minimum wage, sorry, no, he didn't. He raised the minimum wage for all federal workers to $15 an hour. So all federal workers make at least $15 an hour. That's over like 300,000 people. That's really good. He ended the war in Afghanistan. Great. But let's talk about what he hasn't done. Things that he can do right now. He hasn't done a thing about the student debt crisis. He's gotten rid of like 0.3% or something like that of student debt. Incredibly insufficient. And I mean, what even is that? He has not taken steps to legalize marijuana. He has not freed, to my knowledge, a single nonviolent drug offender. I mean, what are we talking about here? He had the chance to raise the federal minimum wage, but let the parliamentarian, a person with an advisory position, say no. And he said, okay, we're not going to do anything about it. He ran on the public option. We're not seeing anything like that right now. We have ongoing infrastructure negotiations where he's letting two corrupt senators, and by the way, he's also corrupt, torpedo this entire thing. Whereas when FDR was still alive, of course, the legendary quote that he said, referencing to the rich and the powerful and the people whose taxes he wanted to raise, they didn't want their taxes raised, He said, I welcome their hatred. He took on Wall Street. He took on the rich and the powerful. And he won. Now, of course, after he died, everything that he did was, of course, then undone by the business class. But that's an entirely different conversation for another video. But to insinuate that he's the most progressive president in history is a disservice to FDR. It's a disservice to Lyndon B. Johnson. I mean, what are we talking about here? And it's this mischaracterization that really pisses me off the most. Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, they're all the same. They're all the same, guys. These guys are moderate Republicans. If you want to associate the word progressive with somebody like Joe Biden, you should say he somewhat has progressive tendencies every now and again. I mean, what the fuck? They're moderate Republicans. And they call themselves centrists. You know who the actual centrist is? Bernie Sanders. Yeah, he is. You want to know why? Because the things that he advocates for is right in the center of mainstream opinion. The majority of people in this country want universal health care. A majority of people support universal college, legalizing marijuana, raising the minimum wage, all the rest of it. That's a centrist with centrist opinions. That's not radical. Under Barack Obama, the corporate tax rate was 35%. Donald Trump, with his famous tax cuts, cut it to 21%. Joe Biden is proposing to raise it to, 24, 25% from 21% when it was previously 35%. That's the most progressive president in history. Really. I mean, what an absurd statement. I mean, the facts are the facts. With what's going on, with his entire presidency so far, but with the ongoing infrastructure negotiations, which is the topic of the day, and it has been for a while now, FDR is rolling over in his grave. I mean, this isn't progressive at all. What's he doing? I mean, this bill might end up being 1.7 trillion. I mean, in the 3.5 trillion in its own was inadequate. You know, the actual progressives were asking for 6 trillion. So this guy, I don't know what he's up to, but I mean, this is completely democratic, hacky stuff. I mean, you can't even be honest. Just be honest, man. Calling Joe Biden the most progressive president in history. I don't even think Joe Biden would agree with that, buddy.